You open your phone, you see a photo of yourself from 5 years ago, you're smiling. And your first thought isn't, "I was happy." Your first thought is, "I didn't know yet." That's it. That's the whole thing. Not happiness, not youth, not a better life, just the absence of knowing what was coming. And that absence, you would trade almost anything to have it back. Not the circumstances, not the relationships, not the place, not even the time itself. Just that specific quality of mind that existed before certain things happened, before certain people showed you who they really were, before you tried something that mattered and watched it fail, before you understood, not as a concept, but as something you felt in your body, that the future is not a promise, that it never was. There is a before and an after in every person's life, and the strange thing is, the line between them is almost never a single event. It's not the divorce or the loss or the moment everything changed. It's something quieter than that. It's the moment you realized you had been seeing the world through something. Call it hope, call it naivety, call it the psychological armor of someone who hasn't been fully tested yet, and that thing was gone. Not taken, just gone. Dissolved by reality, the way fog dissolves when the sun gets high enough. And what was left was you. Clearer, more accurate, and somehow smaller than before. That is what you miss, not your old life. The version of you that was still capable of living inside an illusion without knowing it was one. The strange thing about illusions is that they don't feel like illusions while you're inside them. They feel like reality. They feel like you, your personality, your natural way of moving through the world. The optimism wasn't optimism. It was just how things were. The belief that effort leads somewhere, that people are mostly trustworthy, that you have some control over how your life unfolds, none of that felt like belief. It felt like fact. And that's precisely what made losing it so disorienting. You didn't lose a belief. You lost what felt like the ground beneath you. There's a concept in psychology that describes the mental model each person builds of the world, how it works, what to expect from it, what you deserve from it. This model forms early. It's built from everything you experienced before you had the language to question any of it. And for a long time, it runs in the background like an operating system you never see. Invisible, automatic, quietly shaping every assumption you make about your future, about other people, about yourself. Most people never examine it. They don't need to, until reality hits something inside them that they didn't know was fragile. And when that happens, the experience isn't intellectual. It isn't a correction or a lesson. It is the sudden awareness that the ground you were standing on was never solid, that everything you assumed about how life works was a construction, yours, inherited, unconscious, and now it no longer holds. People who have been through this rarely describe it as a loss. They describe it as a fracture. Something in the way they see shifted permanently, and there is no shifting it back. The world did not change. Their ability to see it the way they used to, that's what disappeared. And once that goes, everything that follows requires something the old self never needed. Deliberate effort, just to keep moving. Conscious construction of things that used to arise on their own. A kind of internal labor that never fully stops. That is part of what you are grieving. Not just the past, the effortlessness of existing before you had to think so hard about existing. Reality doesn't destroy you all at once. That would almost be easier to process. What it does is more precise than that. It finds the specific places where your understanding of the world was built on something untested, and it tests them, one by one, with no particular schedule and no concern for whether you are ready. And each time something breaks, you adjust, not consciously, not with intention. You simply become a slightly different person on the other side of it, more careful, more guarded, more precise about what to expect from people and from life. From the outside, this looks like maturity. From the inside, it feels like contraction, like the radius of what you're willing to believe in has quietly shortened, and you didn't decide that. It accumulated, the way scar tissue forms without your permission. The person you were before this process had a kind of openness that wasn't naive. It was simply unexposed. There's a difference. Naivety is ignorance performing as wisdom. But what you had was something closer to genuine availability, an openness to outcomes that hadn't been foreclosed yet. You could want things without immediately calculating the probability of losing them. You could trust without running a simultaneous assessment of how that trust might be used against you. You could begin something without the accumulated memory of everything else that didn't finish the way you planned. That's gone now. And the part that goes unspoken, the self that existed before exposure, was always temporary. It was a starting point, not a destination. Reality was always going to press against it. The question was never whether the fracture would happen. The question was what you would do with the person left standing after it did. What most people do is mourn backward. They spend their energy trying to recover a state of mind that belonged to a different stage of existence. They call it finding themselves again, returning to who they really are, without recognizing that who they really are has already moved, that the self they are trying to return to was never the final version. It was just the version that hadn't been tested yet. You don't want to go back to your old life. You want to go back to the version of you that hadn't yet learned to protect itself. That's a specific thing to want, and it's worth being precise about it, because most people aren't. They confuse the longing with a place, or a relationship, or a period of time. But strip all of that away, and what's underneath is simpler and harder than any of those things. You want to exist again, without the weight of everything you now know. Without the automatic calculation that runs in the background every time you consider trusting someone, or wanting something, or beginning again. That calculation wasn't always there. You remember existing without it. And what you remember most isn't the happiness, it's the absence of that internal friction. The lightness of moving through life before experience taught you to brace for it. But that memory leaves something out. That version of you was also afraid, also uncertain, also carrying things it didn't know how to name. You have remembered selectively, the way everyone does, keeping the openness, discarding the confusion, until what remains is something that never quite existed. A self that was free in ways the actual past never fully was. What you are mourning is partly real and partly a thing your mind constructed from longing. And the inability to tell the difference between the two is exactly what keeps you searching backward instead of standing in what's here. There is a reason you can't return to who you were, and it has nothing to do with time. Time is just the surface. The real reason is that knowledge, once absorbed into the body, doesn't reverse. You cannot unknow what you know. You cannot unfeel what restructured you from the inside. The exposure already happened. And the self that existed before it was always contingent on not having gone through it yet. This is not a tragedy. It is simply the nature of psychological development, which, unlike what most people imagine, does not move in a straight line towards something better. It moves towards something more real, and more real is not always more comfortable. More real means less protected, less insulated from the actual texture of existence, less able to live inside a version of the world that the world itself has already contradicted. The people who spend years trying to return to a former self, a former feeling, a former sense of possibility, are not weak. The impulse is completely understandable. What they are avoiding is the specific discomfort of having to construct an identity on the other side of disillusionment, of having to ask without the safety net of old assumptions, who am I when I can no longer rely on what I used to believe about myself and about life? That question is the actual threshold, not the loss itself. What comes after the loss, the moment you have to decide what to do with a self that has been stripped of its former certainties, that is where most people stop. They stand at that threshold and look backward, because backward at least is familiar. Forward is a territory that offers no guarantees and no map. If what you're hearing makes sense to you, subscribe to this channel. What comes next is the part most people are not willing to look at. At some point you made a decision you don't remember making. Not about your career, not about a relationship. Something quieter than that. You decided, somewhere below the level of conscious thought, that wanting things fully was no longer something you could afford. And from that point on, everything you pursued came with a built-in distance, a part of you in it and a part of you already prepared for it to disappear. You called it being realistic. You called it growing up. But what it actually was a tax you started paying on every future experience to insure yourself against the cost of the ones that already ended badly. And the tax worked. You got hurt less. You were also less alive. That's the thing nobody tells you about protecting yourself from loss. It works on everything equally. It doesn't discriminate between the things worth protecting yourself from and the things worth burning for. It just builds the wall, and then you stand behind it safe and wonder why nothing feels like it used to. Nobody tells you that clarity is uncomfortable, that seeing yourself accurately, without the filter of who you hoped you were, is not a relief. It is a confrontation. And most people, when they finally arrive at that confrontation, look away. Not because they are cowards, because what they see doesn't match anything they were told to want. You were told to find yourself. Nobody mentioned that finding yourself might mean discovering someone you don't entirely recognize, someone quieter than expected, someone whose actual desires, separated from ambition, from performance, from what was supposed to matter, are strange and specific and don't fit neatly into the life already built around them. That's the part that waits on the other side of exposure. Not wisdom, not strength, just a person standing in front of themselves with fewer places to hide, and the discomfort of that, of seeing without the former buffers, is not a sign that something is wrong. It is what it actually feels like when something is finally real. I'll be direct about what I actually think. People who are stuck in the past are not mourning a life. They are mourning a version of themselves that didn't yet have to be accountable for anything. The attachment isn't sentimental, it's psychological avoidance dressed as sensitivity. They return to the past because that's the last place the ego felt protected, the last place where responsibility hadn't fully arrived yet, where the story of who they were still felt safe enough to live inside. And over time, that choice, because it is a choice, even when it doesn't feel like one, doesn't make them deeper. It makes them smaller, bitter in ways they can't fully explain, resentful of people who moved forward, allergic to anything that demands they show up as someone new. You already know what this feeling is now. You've known for a while. You just didn't have the words for it, and words matter. Because without them, the thing lives in you unnamed, and unnamed things have a way of running the show without permission. It was never the life you missed. It was the version of you that still had the luxury of not knowing what you now know. That version is gone, simply because reality does not negotiate with the version of you that existed before it arrived. It never did. It never will. What you do with that is the only question that remains, not how to recover what dissolved. not how to return to a self that belonged to a different stage of existence, but whether you are willing to take the person that survived all of it, exposed, more accurate, with fewer illusions and more weight, and build something that belongs entirely to who you are now. That is the only direction that has ever actually existed. Everything else was just the long way of figuring that out. Subscribe, and thank you for watching until here. See you in the next video.